morning friends, and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on Indian poetry in English. My dear friends, we have come a long way, but then when something begins, it has also to come to an end. And now we are in the last phase of our lecture, and the last phase we have titled it as Marginalized Voices. In this we shall be studying some poets who, because of some reason or the other, either because of taking up some unusual themes as the topics of their poems, and then the delineation of something which we can call unusual, they actually became, or they were rather, relegated. But then we always say that when something is on the margin, it actually speaks more. And among such voices, today we are going to discuss one very important name, and that is the name of the poet who is Hosang Merchant. The moment we talk about Hosang Merchant, we are actually reminded of what Merchant wrote and how he became a representative of the voice of the voiceless, because as we have already seen that while we were discussing Indian poetry in English, we have heard all sorts of voices, but this voice is unique because of many reasons. Indian writing in English, which assimilates all kinds of writing, cannot be confined only to the dominant discourses alone. We have already seen that in the contemporary times, with several changes outside and even in our own country, meta narrative has been challenged by little narratives. There have been different voices and different discourses have been resulted, namely queer writing, Dalit discourse, tribal literature we discussed in the previous week. All these actually have been much in talk, much in discussion. These voices also need our special attention because they are still marginalized in some way or the other. Now, when we talk of the word queer, naturally many of us actually start thinking whether there has something been wrong. But then, my dear friend, while something was in a different state and when there were certain things which could not be talked of in public, now these issues have also attracted the attention of poets and writers. When we talk about queer writing, especially in Indian writing in English, it started during the 1990s, and in such the themes which can be considered to be a bit unusual for many of us who are traditionalists. The themes of homosexuality is not taboo now. Earlier, it was actually quite restricted and people were not in a position to talk about it publicly. Even though homophobia is prevalent in our society, but then people do not want to talk about it. And it was actually Hosang Merchant for the first time who actually challenged this normative approach to sexuality in and through his poems. Some prominent names in the field of queer writings, especially in Indian writing in English, are Hosang Merchant, then Suniti Nam Joshi, Ruth Vanita, Eunice D'Souza, Salim Kidboy, Vikram Seth, R. Raj Rao, Firdaus Kangna, etc. And the first collection of queer poems entitled The Lion and the Antler was by Salin Rakesh. While talking about queer writings, it is quite significant to mention one of the observations by Chutan De, who says, of the writings that lay the foundations of queer literary genre in India, Yarana, gay writings from South Asia, which actually was the first and foremost and which was actually an eye opener, and this was edited by Hosang Merchant. Then Facing the Mirror, Lesbian Writings from India, and again Same-Sex Love in India, a Literary History, which was edited by Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidbai, very famous names. And Ruth Vanita's Love Right, Same-Sex Marriage in India and the West, and Marchant's Forbidden Sex or Texts, New India's Gay Poets, deserve to be mentioned specifically, since these writers have ventured out to break these silences. I am underlining this word, to break these silences, meaning thereby such things already prevail in the society, but no one ever dared speak it out in public. So, and this, the self-willed neutrality and secrecy about homosexual people and their lives that a race had so tactfully managed to maintain over the years. These seminal works are indeed works of literature. To say that they are not the works of literature will be perhaps an early conclusion. And these works of literature, which attempt to speak about issues that concern homosexual people, to reclaim an equal space into the mainstream. Now, when we talk about Hosang Marchant, Hosang Marchant was the first person who actually openly acknowledged himself as a queer poet, queer Indian poet writing in English. But now, who this Hosang Marchant was and why he became so popular and why his works need to be discussed and why his works need to be explored, that actually remains a point of discussion. Hosang Marchant was born in the year in which India got independence, and perhaps Marchant also might have realized that after years and years of secrets, this was actually a time that these secrets ought to be divulged. It was not a question simply of sex, but it was actually a question of the feelings. It was the question of love. It was the question not only of sexuality, as he himself says, it was a question of sainthood. So, he was born as Hosang Deen Saw Marchant. His full name was Hosang Deen Saw Marchant, and he was born in a Zoroastrian family in Mumbai. He did his early education and then he shifted to Los Angeles, where from Occidental College he did a master's. And Marchant had also, the advantage of having studied Buddhism and Sufism. He had also the opportunity of teaching in Germany, Iran and Jerusalem, and he is an academic poet in the sense that he was a professor at Hyderabad Central University. Marchant is not only a poet, but also a novelist, a critic, a translator, academician and activist. He is referred as the first openly acknowledged queer poet. He is supposed to be the first queer voice of India. What Marchant himself says, he says, because many of the poets and critics and even scholars have denigrated the writings of Hosang Marchant, but then what Marchant says is, literature has no sex and poems have no sex organs. There is only good writing or bad writing. Now, we would also like to have a look at what Hosang writes and why we are giving it a different color. If we have a look at the themes of his poetry, of course, Hosang Marchant is a representative of the voice of the voiceless. Of course, there are certain autobiographical details and search for identity in his poems. In a way, Marchant challenges, he actually interrogates the traditional views about love and sex. One can find a quest for love in the poetic world of Marchant, and this love not only talks about body, but this love talks about spirit. We will find ample number of poems where Marchant actually tries to find out how love can not only be sex, rather love can be a sort of spirituality. And that is why Hosang is supposedly challenging the social dogmas. His poems actually cry for freedom. He calls himself a male homosexual Parsi by religion, Christian by education, Hindu by culture and Sufi by persuasion. Now, what sort of poetry does Hosang Merchant write? Hosang Merchant has got quite a good number of poetry collections to his credit. He started his poetic journey from Flower to Flame, which came out in the year 1989, then Stone to Fruit, Yusuf in Memphis, Hotel Golconda, poems 1991 and 1992, The Home, The Friend and the World, then Jonah and the Whale, Love's Permission. I mean, there are n number of collections to his credit, but one of his collections which actually drew attention worldwide was Sufiana poems, which came out in the year 2013. His Vallejo Blues, then selected poems, then Hyderabad quartets, all these are very famous and they have got a lot of food for thought. Merchant also wrote a novel which is entitled The Man Who Would Be Queen. It is actually an autobiographical fiction, and then there are other critical writings entitled Forbidden Sex Texts, Indian Homosexuality, Yarana, which was the first gay writing from South Asia. It is a seminal anthology in the area of gay writing in India. Now, what are actually Hosang's personal views on poetry? Let us have a look at it, what he said in one of the interviews given to another poet, Meena Kandaswamy. Poets have no access to grind. Their objective is the poem itself. I mean, he has already said that there is good writing, there is bad writing. You cannot nominate a writing as consisting of sex or whatsoever. However, we poets have to abstract our experience to fit it to the reader's experience. We all share the same space and time. Some great poets make their own space and their times. It comes as a surprise to know. He actually refers to some very major and significant names like Whitman, Melville and then Dickinson. They were gay, but do we really consider them as gay poets? No, we consider them as transcendentalists. Even after 150 years, this transcendence is a poem. So, what Merchant believes is a poem has to move, a poem has actually to record. It is also said that Hosang Merchant, who himself has acknowledged that he had this problem of homosexuality and all. So, he has in many of his writings mentioned how he developed a friendship with some even males, and with them he enjoyed their company, and he also had said in one of the poems entitled Alif Alpha, what he says, a whole race with its hand in pockets is something an eye cannot see, but a whole race knows and keeps to itself. I mean, he is referring to the secrets and says that all of us, I mean an entire race having their hands in the pockets, meaning thereby they hide, they actually want to say, but they do not say it. And then in another poem entitled My Lover for Asfaq, where he says, poetry is a way to use language without colonizing words, without colonizing words. Now, when he talks about language, you know, his views are at times very different, and he says that I have all through I have loved strangeness and difference, strangeness and difference. One of his famous collections entitled Hyderabad Quartets, where he says that it is not man who writes language, rather it is language which writes man. And then in another poem entitled Couplets written with blessings of Faisal Chishti Nampalli Dargah, where he says that why he developed such a sort of fascination towards his own compatriots was, my hatred of my father led me to this love of boys and men, saints and sinners. And he believes that all of us have in us not only the males but also the females. And he says each on his own dream over coffee. The chef dreams about America, the waiter dreams about custom, I dream about the waiter. So, if one goes and if one reads the poems of Hosang Merchant, one will find that not only there is a sort of a spontaneity there is a sort of genuineness. I mean, there is no such a thing as a poet he hides, rather he actually tries to reveal what usually many poets and many individuals per se they try to conceal. So, his Sufiana poems which became very popular, fine, we actually should know a little bit about it, because not only was he influenced very much by Sufism and Buddhism, rather he says in this collection there are of course 54 poems, and majority of the poems are soaked in the language of sexuality. There are at times there is a sort of religiosity, but then the imagery that Marchant uses are full of sexuality. But then that does not mean Hosang is completely unaware of our scriptures. He also talks of our scriptures, he also gives references from our scriptures, and then he mentions Bhagsunag, then Krishna and Radha. He believes that writing poetry and writing for these categories of people is a sort of self purifying journey. There are images of Rumi, Ghalib and Derek Walcott. What he says in one of the poems is, my lovers say I am looking for a poem, my students say I am looking for God, but I am neither looking for lover nor poem nor God, but for death, which is all of these. So, the question is, the ultimate question is that all of us have to die. So long as we are living, we must not live a life which is borrowed. And then in one poem after another, we can find references to the companionship of people of the same sex. One poem entitled Bathers at River Vagsunag, where he gives a very beautiful description of how right from the beginning we have been instructed to have a homo socio group, and there that he mentions, today the boys are at their Sunday bath. He actually picturizes how some of the boys who are taking a dip in the water, and the poet says, today the boys are at their Sunday bath, I watch them strip to the waist, and I plunge heedless head first into the pond, newly born, their wet limbs ripple in the morning sun as their loin cloths fall in coils to the floor, beads of water fall like rainbows on stone, and the snake in paradise is aroused once more, Jai Shankar, Jai Jai Volenath. So, not only does the poet refer to our scriptural slogans and all, but then he says that we have been instructed to formulate groups right from the beginning. So, if that group develops a different sort of association, a different sort of relationship, one should always try to find, one should always try to discover a scent of love in that. And then one poem which we can take here just for a reference is entitled Scent of Love, because Hosang Merchant can be considered thoroughly a poet of love. Of course, we are free to make meanings, interpret things, because he himself has acknowledged, but then what he believes is, it is not the question of body, but it is actually a question of soul. And he says, it is raining a small rain, a gentle rain over all the world, gentle like that love which is so hard to sustain or to receive or to reciprocate. Because men are greedy, they bite and tear. There are at times you will also find that there is a sort of scathing attack on this heterosexual identity of people, and that is why he says they bite and tear. You from the mountains, I from the plains, I from the city, you from the forest, I a hunter and you a deer. The city is full of the smell of my dear today. The musk mingles with the rain, its scent spreads. This morning I lie in bed dreaming of you. I was to be hunter, but I am an inert deer. Why? Because I am not able to express myself. And that is why he says, sensing danger you wait, and I sense danger with you. Two people having emotions for each other are not able to meet. That is why the world so crazed for Venetian. He raises a very significant question, that the why is the world after a meat of a game animal. So why? When the world is after a meat of a game animal, and he says, I wonder at a living creature who must so eat a living creature. So when we are ready to eat another living creature, fine, I often feel, I often wonder why it is so, why the world is crazy. And suddenly the wounded doe dies for you. She has dragged herself to you to die before you. Her stag, did she not stay one night inert when you slew her in bed, just as tonight I wish to slay you? So poem after poem you can find that the poet actually tries to bring out or to reveal the feeling of love. And then he says, does not our passion only bring suffering? And do we all not die daily a little, satisfying our longings? Play, go play, though your scent drives me wild. Fine. And I have myself become wild in my love for a wild thing. See the use. Become wild, a wild thing. Slay or be slain. And your hand will not be cleansed of blood ever again. The pain of love is everywhere. And the scent of this musk cannot be washed even in a rain. So the poet is actually obsessed with the feeling of love for his partner, whosoever it be, because we find the poet had many such associations. Now we can also take one poem from My Sunset Marriage, where the poet once again talks about the burning desire, the burning bodily desire, and the poet says, the world is the stuff of dreams of martyrs and madmen. Palestine, Ahzab, Iran burned, go to the burning ghettos. And he says, everywhere around you, everywhere besides you, you will find that there is a sort of burning, there is a sort of desire. Go to the burning ghettos with kerosene and water, pour alternately over the fires to lengthen the funeral drama to the pyre. I, poor HM. So HM stands for Hosang merchant. I, poor Hosang merchant, burning, burn to the cinder, come back with a begging bowl. So I am yearning for love, I am asking for love, I am a beggar in the course of love. Fine. And then again we can take another poem which is entitled, My Sister Takes a Long Time to Die. Here you can find how the poet makes use of water imagery, and the poet actually talks about the plight of his own sister. And then we can also find that there is a sort of chiaroscuro, fine. This is actually the treatment of light and shade that you can find in this poem throughout. She had waited long in the dark of her Lord, the Lord she called Father, who never had a kind word, the Lord who giveth and taketh away, the man she calls Lord and manservant, the lover with fair hair and blue eyes, who ferries her thither and thither like Charon. So ultimately our soul, fine, our soul will be ferried by, fine, by somebody, our dead, our dead body will be ferried. And that is why the poet, my sister, he says, my sister, she hangs by our slender thread that cannot snap, because the long time of waiting is never dead. And towards the end, what the poet says, death, the brother who no sister in life can wed, that unfulfilled love, that great longing that does not die, that long time of waiting never dies. Love is also a form of waiting. And again the poet, as he beautifully tries to balance the surreal image of light and shade, and now in the brilliance of summer, of melting light and butterflies, she floats between dark and light, as on a river a swan doubly glides, one half flesh, one half shadow, sister and brother, reality and reflection onward river. But then to say that this poet only talked about love, and that love also which the civilized society can consider as a sort of unusual love, but the poet also takes us back, and then he also refers to the Krishna imagery, and then he says, how when Krishna also had a sort of love, and it was actually Krishna's love where when the Kaliya Mardhan was actually a venomous snake, and this Kaliya Mardhan, because of the fear of Garur, had come to take a shelter in Vrindavan, and in Vrindavan near the Yamuna river this Kaliya Mardhan snake was there, and while Radha was trying to cross the river, this Kaliya Mardhan threatened, and Radha informed Krishna, and Krishna also tried, but Krishna was also threatened, but finally it so happens that Krishna plays over the head of this Kaliya Mardhan, and Kaliya Mardhan finally is subdued. Now there you find that how Kaliya Mardhan has to submit to the love, and then so the poet says very beautifully here, and we are all brides, the coils of the serpent are now the coils of karmic time. Of the circles of skirt of dancing Sufis, men become women in the face of father time. Let the threshing floor be the dance floor. Let the dance floor be my grave. I dance on death's serpent hood. Towards the end it so happened that Krishna had danced over Kaliya Mardhan's head, the Kaliya Mardhan, the snake, and because of Krishna's weight on Kaliya Mardhan's body, Kaliya Mardhan had to release all its poison. I lie face down in the street in the summer heat. So this is from Kaliya Mardhan prologue, Sufi tree. From Hyderabad quartet also we can take some lines where the poet mentions and rather admits in a very poetic manner how he feels himself a woman, and he says, walking down the street of Bangle sellers pleases the woman in me. So in every man, he says, in every man there is a woman, and in every woman there is a man. Everyone is Radha, everyone Krishna, some bhang drunk or Narsimha in collar. There is no man or woman, only the God of love, sweet death. All of us have to die. And that is why it's very important that we must understand this reality. And in one of the Hyderabadi quartets, the poet also refers to how even in our scriptures we find a mention of the love between Sudama and Krishna. They were also men, but then their friendship was also a sort of love. And then he mentions how Sudama and Krishna, who were classmates, Krishna became the king and Sudama remained what he was. So once when Sudama went to visit Krishna, Krishna wanted to eat the rice, which Sudama had with him, and finally we find it was actually the result of their friendship and Krishna's benevolence that by the time Krishna returns, Krishna's hovel is actually turned into a sort of mansion. And then what the poet says is beautifully described. Sudama's eyes filled with tears and his hovel a mansion appeared. He had never left home, only invited a friend into his heart. So when our scriptures also talk of such love, such associations, why we also cannot talk of, why we always say that such a thing is taboo, and that is why when we have to evaluate Hosang Merchant as an Indian English poet, we can say that not only has Hosang Merchant played a very crucial role in establishing courses on Indian gay literature in Indian universities, but as he has himself said that I am actually trying to create a new world for my boys who do not understand. He always writes against, as I have been saying, against the heterosexual normative discourse of our society. And then one can find plethora of details about many celebrated Indian characters like Shiva, Krishna, Gopi, Radha and Sudama. In Hyderabad quartets, what he says, my task as a writer was to give tongue to the dumb ones. He said that this is there within us and we are not able to speak it out. The beautiful boys I have loved were really too silent to tell their story. I spoke for those who could not speak. I was reprimanded always for talking too much. I was always reprimanded. But his criticism can be seen in a different light, because as a poet we find that Hosang merchant wanted to celebrate love, even though through same sex marriages, same sex loves. And these of late, I think the government has also taken cognizance to that, and in several circles this is being talked of getting approved or whatsoever. But then one can always find a sense of alienation because of the social strictures and structures around merchant. Merchant also tried to understand the psychology of women. While he talks about homosexuality and homoeroticism, that does not mean he does not have respect for women. He already had respect for women, and he simply explored sex as a way to liberate oneself, sex as a way to sainthood, and sex as a way to spiritual longing. We can find it in his poetry. So before we come to assess Hosang merchant as a poet, we can find that as merchant believes that the body dies, the soul lives. What then am I tied to? So this body which is ephemeral, this body which is transitory, fine, holding hands, fine. I mean, one can always find that when two males hold each other's hands, then many of us may not approve of it. But then, as merchant says, that it should not be seen merely as a meeting of two bodies or a union of two bodies, rather it is actually a union with soul which is more important. He often uses myth by giving extra sense of cultural touch to his poetry, and one can find a search for identity which has been marginalized in the dominant discourse of our society. My dear friends, we can find that Hosang merchant's poems are in a way a sort of a reformation. It is actually a sort of reformation for a better unity, for actually a better meeting. And then what he himself had said, as everyone knows by now, I am a homosexual. To write this sentence and to speak it publicly, which is great liberation, is why I write. We can always find that merchant challenges heterosexist ideology of the patriarchal society, and he seems to have erased the presence of the same sex love. Scathing, which is often a quality in the poems of Hosang merchant, they also can be understood as a sort of reclaiming for an equal space. One can always find a journey from imagination to reality in a poetic world of Hosang merchant, and that is why he very beautifully says poetry is a way to use language. So before we sum up this discussion, let us take some major lines from merchant, where he says, people forgot their own names, they remembered the name which too they soon forgot. Why do you ask the name? They asked and remembered only love. What he says, it is not the name that is important, but when he talks about name, he also thinks of sex. It is not the name that matters. What matters is love. It can always not only bridge the gap, it can always bridge the boundaries, but it can act as a sort of unifying and a sort of purifying force. With this, we come to the end of today's talk. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good day.